Okay, this is the first video on inventory. There will be more videos, I don't know how many. I'm going to break it up into sort of bite-sized chunks so that you can have more of a chance of understanding the discussion. Just keep in mind that you need to work through your textbook. You need to work through the textbook examples. This video and subsequent videos might give you some assistance with that, might give you some ideas, might help you to understand what's going on, but there's no substitute for working through the textbook. Okay, here's an image of showing inventory. These are books, and the other thing is we expect to see with books these days, not in the old days, but if you've got any very old books, then you won't see a particular feature that's on the books now, but of course they have barcodes. Therefore, probably when you buy books in a decent sized bookstore, they're going to be scanned, and therefore it'll be a perpetual inventory system. But if you're buying second-hand books at a fete or something like that, funnily enough they won't be scanned, so therefore that will be an example of a periodic inventory system. This image of a forklift truck is showing a couple of boxes with those barcodes alongside, so this indicates a perpetual inventory system. And these products here, what are they? They're spices, I guess. Probably I can't see any barcodes here, and by the way, even if by the way, sometimes when you see a product with a barcode on it, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's being accounted for with perpetual inventory. It's just probable. With these products, I'd say, no, this is going to be a periodic inventory system. So let's just have a look at it. Now, by the way, controlling inventory in a business is a very, very important part of a business being successful. Our major retailers, Woolworths, Coles, Bunnings, Masters, etc., Aldi's, they have to be very, very good at controlling inventory and resupplying themselves and just keeping a track of it, measuring it and accounting for it. Gone the wrong way. Okay, inventory or stock refers to the goods and materials that a business holds for the ultimate purpose of resale. Okay, you'll find Wikipedia is often useful for helping you understand some of the terminology in accounting. Here we have a Wikipedia entry for inventory where it says, as you saw on the slide, inventory or stock. At least they're using inventory is slightly more American, stock is slightly more English, refers to the goods and materials that a business holds for the ultimate purpose of resale. In other words, it's the goods that a business buys that it intends to sell. And of course it also includes goods that a business has the manufactured goods that they intend to sell. Now if you have stationery and pens and office supplies, this is not normally regarded as being inventory. These are often called supplies, and therefore the same systems that we're talking about for inventory probably do not apply to them. In a moment we'll go back to the PowerPoint presentation. As I said, Wikipedia is useful, but don't use Wikipedia as a major reference for your PhD thesis. But at this level in your studies, it's quite useful. Check it out, and it should help you understand some of the terminology in the subject. Alright, these are the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about. We've already begun to talk about perpetual and periodic inventory systems. We'll be looking at the purchaser's ledger account. We'll be looking at the inventory ledger account. We'll be thinking, well, that's pretty simple, that's the easiest part, beginning and ending inventory figures. We'll be looking at the inventory flow assumptions, which include LIFO, FIFO, average and specific identification. We'll be looking at a ratio called inventory turnover. We'll be looking at another ratio, which is a measure of the days that the days in inventory that items of stock, how long it takes, how many days it takes to sell them. We'll be looking at the concept of inventoriable costs versus period costs. They're contrasting thoughts, they're contrasting words. We'll be looking at WIP inventory. What's WIP? It's work in process. So when you're talking about manufacturing, you can have, for example, raw materials inventory, and you can have work in process inventory, and you can have finished goods inventory. We'll be talking about briefly about LCM, which is lower of cost or market, and we'll be talking about a very, very simple inventory system, should be a favourite system, which is called the 2-bin inventory system. Well, we may as well dispose of that one right now. The 2-bin inventory system is when you conceptually you have 2 bins, and when one bin is empty, then you reorder for the next bin. My wife tends to use that sort of system with when she's replacing toothpaste or toilet paper. In other words, that in the shelf somewhere she'll have a spare tube of toothpaste or a spare couple of rolls of toilet paper, and when it gets down to those last few, then she thinks, oh, I better go out and reorder some more of that inventory item. Also, we're going to be talking about accounting principles in inventory, so therefore you should be aware of accounting principles anyway, but you should be thinking about the interaction between what's consistency got to do with inventory, what's comparability got to do with inventory, disclosure in inventory, materiality in inventory, and of course, very, very importantly, conservatism in inventory, which has to do with the accounting rule about lower of cost or market. Here is a barcode. As I said before, the barcode tends to indicate that the product is probably being measured by using a perpetual inventory system, but not necessarily. For example, as we mentioned before, a book can be sold in a bookstore, and therefore they're probably likely to scan in the barcode, but a book can also be sold at a school fete where they're not going to be using a barcode scanner. Not that I've seen lately anyway. Alright, and also when you go into a supermarket these days, most supermarkets are using perpetual inventory systems, but and the perpetual inventory systems means that the barcode's hooked up to their computer. I don't think they computerise bananas yet, although maybe they do. If they sell them in a packet or something or other, then they can put a barcode on the packet. But mostly when I've seen bananas for sale, then they what do? They weigh them, I think, don't they? They weigh them, but and I don't know if that goes into the computer or not, but I don't see a barcode on them. There are 2 main accounting systems for recognising the purchase of inventory. One is called the periodic inventory system, and the other is called the perpetual inventory system. With the periodic inventory system, what we do is that when we buy some goods to sell, we put them into a purchaser's account, and the purchaser's account is an expense account. When we use a perpetual, we're assuming, by the way, in periodic system that all the goods that we buy, all of them, in fact, will be sold. And funnily enough, then at the end of the period, we have a big surprise. There's some left over, and then we have to account for that. So this assumption is correct at the end of the accounting period when a stock take is made, and recognition is given to the fact that inventory remains in the business. Therefore, it's at that stage. Until then, we're just assuming that everything's going to be expensed. In other words, that's why we put it in the purchaser's account. So at the end of the period, whenever you do the stock take, it is at that stage that the stock inventory is first recognised as an asset. Let's compare the periodic and perpetual inventory systems. One way to try to understand it is to think of rent. I know rent is not inventory, but anyway, think of it anyway because it might help you to understand it. If rent is paid 1 week in advance, then the accounting system's likely to just put it into a debit to a rent expense account. It's an expense account increasing debit. If rent, however, is paid for a significant period in advance, like 2 years, then we're likely to think, hang on, that's an asset. and therefore we make a debit to an asset account, and we then write off that asset, expense that asset, probably month by month, and reduce it until 2 years later, I guess it gets down to zero. So rent is not inventory, I'm not suggesting that, but this is one way of thinking about inventory so that you can understand the difference between perpetual and periodic. So under the periodic system, we debit purchases and expense account. The inventory account is only used when we do a periodic stock take. Under the perpetual system, we debit inventory, which is an asset account. And then the asset account, we do debits and credits to it frequently. I guess the perpetual system pretty much these days relies on us having computers. Before computers, most inventory systems would have been periodic. After computers, it's gradually been changing, and now most systems would be perpetual. So the inventory account under the perpetual system is used every time we buy goods. In other words, there's a debit every time we buy some goods to resell, and it is also then credited, reduced, every time we sell goods. So it is that's how we get the word. It is perpetually or continuously up to date. Now let me give you a cultural example, which may give you insight into the differences between the two systems. It's an Australian cultural example, although I guess this happens in other countries as well. When Australians go to a private party or barbecue, even that's the abbreviation, barbecue, other countries have barbecues as well, they often take an esky. Yeah, they call it an esky. They call it a chili billy in New Zealand. They probably call it a cooler in the United States. And you take an esky containing stubbies, I think it's another Australian word, and because you'll notice that Australians like words that end in IES or Y, like esky and stubbies, and this type of thing. So stubbies are small beer bottles. During the party, this is what Australians do. Australians will they'll drink their stubbies, and they will share. They will shout with their friends. In other words, they're likely to say, oh, here, I have one of mine, and they hope, I guess, that their friends will also give them one back later in the afternoon or the evening. So we can apply inventory concepts to this situation. Here is an esky, in case you didn't know what one looked like. This is a real esky, but what Australians have done is now they use the word esky, which is a brand name, and they apply it to all of these insulated cooling type boxes. And this is an example of a stubby. This is a Carlsberg stubby. So in other words, it's a small beer bottle, and you drink out of the bottle most of the time, rather than bothering to pour it into a glass. Okay, so imagine that somebody called Norm goes to the barbecue with an esky containing a dozen stubbies, 12 stubbies. He's seriously equipped. He shouts some friends and they shout back. That is, he gives some of his stubbies to his friends to drink, and his friends give him some of their stubbies. His friend Bob forgot to bring his esky and therefore borrows stubbies from his friends. They'd have to be good friends, wouldn't they? At the end of the evening, Norm does a stock take. He has a look at his esky, and he discovers that he has 4 stubbies left out of the 12. He concludes he must have consumed 8 stubbies and therefore decides to take a taxi home. See, what he's done is he's done a stock take. He knew his beginning inventory, which was 12. He can see his ending inventory, which is 4, so therefore he knows that the goods, if you like, that he consumed, there must have been 8 stubbies. This case study demonstrates the periodic inventory system. In other words, he did a stock take. Norm only knows how much he consumed by making a stock take. But was his calculation of 8 stubbies consumed correct? The 8 stubbies correspond with cost of goods sold in a business enterprise. It may be that the shouting process was not completely symmetrical, or that his thirsty friend Bob consumed several of Norm's stubbies, as well as maybe some of his other friends. What is the important information that Norm wants? Most importantly, he wants to know how many stubbies he has consumed. Therefore, I noticed years ago that I didn't even know what I was doing, but I noticed that I was using a perpetual inventory system by doing something. Do you do